How do you feel about tipping in the salon industry? Do you feel it's fair compensation for the services rendered, or is it an outdated practice? It's time to debate this topic. Stay tuned for a lively debate on the pros and cons of tipping in the salon industry coming right up. Welcome to the Salon Scoop, a podcast by Salon S.O.S. I'm your host, Scott Moon, the founder of Salon S.O.S., and I'm obsessed with helping salon professionals live their best life. In this show, we shop talk all things salon to bring you real-life stories, debates, entertainment, and inspiration to help you find happiness and success in this beautiful industry. If you work in the salon industry in any capacity, this podcast is open to you. So set down your scissors or rinse out that toner and let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Salon Scoop. Today is a fun podcast episode because Sarah and I are going to be talking about pros and cons and debating the ins and outs of the tipping culture in salons. This has long been tipping has been ingrained in our society, at least in North America, for many, many years. But as much as it's been considered a customary practice, it's just almost like an automatic. There's so many differing opinions about it, right? Consumers either love it or hate it. Services obviously probably more love it because it's additional income. But there's a big question that needs to be asked, really, is tipping a fair compensation for service, or is it really an outdated practice in our industry? And, should we be moving on? So to have this fun debate with me today, I've brought along my one and only partner in crime, Sarah Perrin. Sarah, what's one area or one business that you typically go to, or service that you have that you always do tip for?
I would say the food industry in particular, like a sit-down restaurant, that seems to be, again, just like a customary thing that's just kind of an automatic. And at a lot of places, there's automatic gratuities included. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I am so on the fence. I have very strong beliefs in one area, and then also I kind of teeter on that because I do have opinions coming from consumer standpoint and a business owner standpoint. So yeah, I'm excited. I feel like this is kind of a hot topic that people do have varying opinions on, or very staunch opinions on, one way or the other.
I fully agree. So let's jump into it and start the debate. You obviously have been a service provider in our industry for a long time. So talk to us about the case for tipping in our industry, and the importance of it, the value that it brings.
Absolutely. So I would say, especially when you're first starting out, at least I can speak for myself. I essentially lived off my tips for the first few years that I was providing services, because you're not fully booked. Your prices are typically a little bit lower because you're just kind of starting out. And yeah, tipping was the way that I paid for my groceries and my gas and my living expenses, essentially, because you're not making really a super livable wage when you're first starting out, which is super unfortunate. And I would love to change that as a business owner, and we're trying to do that kind of thing, but that's something I digress. We're going to get into that. But the case for tipping, I feel for many people, tipping represents a way to acknowledge the personalized service and skills of the professional who makes them look and feel their best. So especially if you are going above and beyond what a regular service is, the same way that I think this is a good case for tipping in any other situation, restaurants included, is that I don't think it should be an expected thing, but I think it should be an earned thing. And that was something when I first started out, kind of thing, I really went above and beyond to try and make sure that experience was next level and everything like that. And I do feel like my tips did reflect on that. So that is kind of my case for tipping, is that I feel like it is a way to acknowledge when your service provider or your server or whatever whatever is being done is above and beyond what is expected, that's a way of being able to show your gratitude for that. And like I say, in many industries, tipping is kind of how the employee is able to up their wages or their earnings to a livable income, if that makes sense. So that's what I would say my case for tipping is, especially in specific industries, is it's just the only way that you can make it by and actually be making a livable wage.
Yeah, but I'm gonna jump in and say that exactly what you just said there is, to me, like one of the biggest problems that we have in our society with the tipping culture. Like, if people can only be making a livable wage because of tipping,
Mhm.
that's a massive, massive problem that needs to be dealt with. And I understand that where it can't just be the fairy godmother or the genie in the bottle and just like fix things, in the snap of a finger. But fundamentally, to me, that's just wrong. There's big problems there. I look at tipping, and I just see it as so inconsistent and subjective. And I'm against tipping. I'll put it out there. I'm against tipping, in society almost as a whole, because of all the inconsistencies and subjectivity around it, and just the expectation that it's been caused. I look at it, from a consumer standpoint. And if we talk about restaurants, in one case, like, it's just an expectation, right, that you're supposed to tip at a restaurant. And it used to always be, 15% was kind of like the average. And then, if you felt it was like above and beyond, you go, more, you could go less. It was substandard. But now, the past few years, it's been, on the credit card terminals, many places have like started off with like the minimum is 18%. They just decided, what, we're just going to put this in there, and then it goes to 20, then it goes to 25. And what a lot of people don't even realize is that tip that's on those terminals, and you're being asked to put in, whether it's 18%, 15, 18, 20, whatever, they're tipping on top of the tax that you've already paid. And that just makes me absolutely livid. Like, we're already paying, let's say, 15% tax, and then you're charging, me a 20% tip on the amount that includes the tax. It's like, no, I'll tip you on the amount of the actual, product or service itself, but I'm not paying you 20% on the tax that you're collecting. That's absolutely ridiculous, and that
Yeah.
needs to be changed. And I've actually heard that it is starting to be changed, at least in the province of Quebec, because it's almost like a consumer protection thing. It
Gotcha.
really riles me up. But in so many places, it's like, okay, in a restaurant, there's a whole process, right? So it's a sit-down restaurant, and you're expected to tip at the end. And to me, the tip is going for the service of bringing me the food, bringing me, the drinks, pouring the drinks, or taking away the plates and everything. It's not for the actual food that's coming and served. Like, I'm paying for the food, but I'm tipping for the service. And to me, like, that makes sense. That's logical. I can get my head around it. But then you go to like a fast food place, like a Subway restaurant, and now their terminals are asking you to put in a tip. And I'm like, what? You just, because you like built my sandwich in front of me, like, I'm paying for the sandwich. Like, why am I expected to be tipping you on top of that? And I think the expectation now has become so high in many areas that, if you don't tip, um, at a restaurant. We've actually had this experience in the past where we had a really, really terrible experience, from the start of it all. From like the table that we had reserved, like, not being ready. We had to wait an extra like 20, 25 minutes before we actually, got our table. And then we were like poorly looked after. It took so long for them to actually come and see us. The time between services, no one was coming to, refill drinks. We just had a poor experience. And we gave a tip at the end, but it was it was a small tip. And the owner of the restaurant actually came out and debated with us, as if, like, tipping is 15% is like, the expectation, that's a minimum. And I hate that all around as a consumer. So if we come to the
Yeah.
salon industry, right? Like, I know so many consumers that find it frustrating because in the salon, sometimes you go and you have your hair washed, let's say at the back bar by an assistant, and then you have somebody else who's doing your color work, and then you have somebody else sometimes who's maybe doing, the cut and the finishing, and they feel like, on top of the total bill that they've paid, they know they have to tip the shampoo person, they have to tip the color person, they have to tip the cutting person, and it becomes exorbitant for them. And it's frustrating, from that standpoint. And again, because it's so subjective, there's this whole, we make judgments about people like, oh, you know what, they're like a poor tipper, like they're cheap, and someone else is like, oh, you know what, they tip 25%. Wow. And some people like to flaunt, how much they tip in certain places. And it becomes this like status symbol, at the same time. I would much prefer that you just layer it into the pricing, right? And then happens in many places around the world, like many places in Europe. I've been to Australia, South America. You don't tip. There's no expectation to tip because it's just factored into the price up front. So it's like, you know what? You're paying for whatever service it is, and that the tip portion is kind of included in there, and it's going to be distributed in terms of fair wage, like you were talking about earlier, Sarah. And I feel like that's just a much better way because it takes the subjectivity out of it. It takes the inconsistency out of it, both from a service provider standpoint and thinking of an actual stylist or esthetician. If you're counting on, getting 15 to 20% tips as part of your salary, and that's like your expectation, but it's not a guaranteed, like that's a really terrible way to have to be, living with that uncertainty all the time, right? And
I,
I'm frustrated by the whole thing.
yeah,
But
no, here's the thing, Scott. I agree with you tenfold. Like I'm like I've had this conversation with clients, I've had this conversation with other service providers, salon owners. In a perfect world, people would be getting paid what they need to be able to like earn a living wage. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. So I agree. I do think that there should be something like that where maybe it's layered in and whatnot. But then you have the issue of people complaining about the initial price. People are already losing their shit that you have to pay, $60 for a haircut when you used to only have to pay $20 for a haircut, right? So I'm like,
yeah,
again, it's kind of one of those things. I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's like you do things one way and there's going to be, 50% of people that aren't stoked about that, or you layer it in and then you have people being like, well, I don't think that I should have to pay this. The service wasn't there. Like, so I'm like, I can totally see, and I think especially coming from like again a service provider, a consumer, and a business owner point of view, I can see every single angle of this, right? Because even with servers and stuff, have you ever worked in the food industry?
in the food industry,
Yeah, I haven't
no.
personally, but I do have a lot of friends. So I wasn't aware that there's actually like a tip out. So let's say your server sucks, but maybe there's something happening in the back end. Maybe the kitchen is backed up. Maybe three people didn't show up for work. Whatever is happening that you're not aware of going on, but you're just seeing that your service isn't great. So you're like, you know what? I'm not tipping this time. This was ridiculous. I didn't get service, the service that I, expect to be able to leave a tip. That person, depending what restaurant they are working at, still has to tip out sometimes 4 to 6 to 8%. So if they're not getting anything, that actually comes out of their wage. They still have to pay that tip out, which again, I personally think is bullshit, but that's how the industry works. And it shouldn't be like that, but it
Right.
is, unfortunately, right? So there's
It is,
just so,
and
yeah,
I'm going to jump in on this because that came about with that example that I mentioned with the restaurant owner, coming out to argue with us about the tip that we left that time. I don't believe that that's my problem as a consumer. I do feel badly that the system is set up that the waiter or waitress is being penalized, but
yeah,
that's, to me, that's the business that's set up their tipping procedure improperly, right?
yeah.
And that's where it needs to be fixed. Not the consumer has to be the one to fix the problem by just giving more money for poor service.
And again, I do agree with that 100%. And I think this always comes back to, in a perfect world, it wouldn't be necessary. It absolutely wouldn't be necessary. It shouldn't be coming from, and I think I do come from a little bit more of the point of view of being the service provider that has been the one that, you know, eats that cost or whatever it is kind of thing. Or I've known so many servers who, you know, leave at the end of the day actually paying more than they actually ended up making. And again, I think the system is broken. I feel like it needs to be completely reset up. And this has been something that, like I say, it's so interesting because I really do have multiple opinions on it, but in a perfect world, it would just be completely reset up where people are earning a fair wage and the service provider isn't relying on those tips. Because then at that point, too, where does it end? I kind of come from the place of I'm like an over tipper. I tip the guy that fills my gas tank up. And I've had people say, like, why are you doing that? And he's just doing his job. And I'm like, well, my server is just doing her job by bringing me my dinner when I order it or whatever. They're both making minimum wage. And if I can't get out of my vehicle to fill my gas tank out and Buddy is only making minimum wage and it's minus 40 in the middle of winter in Saskatchewan, I'm throwing him a $5 bill because I'm like, this is more than minimum wage work, in my opinion. But again, in a perfect world, it would be making more than minimum wage. So, but then to kind of come back to this, because I know if like the counter argument and like a middle ground kind of would be improved wage standards and option tipping, right? And but then I'm putting my business owner hat on. And I mean, we are in a post-pandemic world where times are tough, finances are tough. You and I have had this conversation about how many different things in our salon we've had to cut and we've had to adjust. And I myself sometimes am barely making a livable wage, trying to make sure that my team is able to have what they need and make what they need to make. So in terms of the, you know, improved wage standards, that's great. That's exactly how it should be. Where is that money coming from though? And especially for small businesses, right? So this is where it becomes such a heated and difficult conversation, is because like again, like I think we all just are striving for this perfect world where everybody is making what they should be and not like, you know, relying on these tips. But the world's
Yeah.
not perfect. So that's the
World's
trouble.
not the world's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect, and we are always in the mindset, typically in the mindset of never being satisfied and always wanting more, right?
More.
Um,
Yep.
and it's easy. We always complain about all sorts of things out there, and um, yeah, I don't know what the solution is, because as you said, if you just increase prices and include it inside, then consumers are going to be upset because prices have gone up. But at the
Totally.
end of the day, they're paying it now anyways. Whether you go in and let's say you have a $70 service at the salon, well, it's not actually $70 because you get to the cash and you have tax on top, and then you got a tip on top, and you're close to $100
Yep.
by the end of it. So it's kind of the same thing. Again, sometimes this is stuff that's personal. I would rather just know that it's $100 going in. I pay that, and that's it. And
Yeah.
it includes the tax and the tip, and then there's no subjectivity, around it, and that's just the way that
Totally.
it is. And I feel like that's a better solution. But again, that sticker shock right off the bat, you know, consumers might not get it and think, wow, it's so much more expensive. Well, technically, it's the same amount of money. And they might say, well, no, but it should be my decision, whether I choose to tip or not. And that's where the big part of tipping debate comes into play. So, Sarah, I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you this question, because this is something that I think about all the time in terms of like what services. When you talked about the gas attendant,
Yeah.
to me, that makes total sense. I'm paying for the gas. Normally, I would have to go and pump my own gas and get out of my car. But at this particular location, if there's somebody who's providing that service to fill the gas for me, now I understand, like I'm tipping for that additional service. But when you're paying for a service, so I'm paying for a haircut.
Yeah.
Let's say that my haircut costs $35, okay? That's the price of a haircut. I'm paying for a haircut.
Yeah.
I get my haircut. I pay $35. What's the tip for?
What's the tip for?
Why am
Again,
I
so
tipping?
this is how I would argue this, or not even argue that. I think it's just more so even the same thing when you go to a restaurant. What's the difference between good and bad service? Did your stylist just have you in and out super quick kind of thing? Not very good conversation, didn't recommend you retail, didn't tell you how to style your hair, didn't add all of these extra things that you would expect from a service, like just did like the bare minimum kind of thing, then I would say, I don't know, you didn't really earn it. I don't think it should be an expected thing. I think it's more so when you go above and beyond within these services and stuff like that, the same way that a server does in a restaurant, right? If they're just putting your food down, bringing your drink kind of thing, they're just doing their job. But if they're, making sure that your experience, I think it all comes down to experience, is what the easy answer is for it kind of thing. How was that a tip worthy experience for you?
Yeah.
Did they go above and beyond?
It's just, I mean, my frustration is it's just way too subjective, unfortunately.
1000%.
And I feel like it causes a lot of anxiety with the service provider because I'm sure that they take it personally. It's like, oh, that person didn't leave a tip, or that's a small tip. That must mean, right, that they didn't have a good experience. They, didn't value me. I didn't do a good job. And that can make you feel bad about yourself. And I just feel like there's too many negatives around it. I I'm I
I
don't mean to
agree.
be insensitive here. I know that the vast majority of salon professionals, specifically in our industry, really do rely on tips as part of their income. I totally get that. And I mean, I'm supportive of our industry obviously thriving and making money. I'm just of the mindset that we need to, find a better way to do it so that people are not relying on a completely subjective thing, as to whether or not they're gonna, be able to make their rent for the month, and the payments. I just think it's a terrible place for us to be in, and we shouldn't be that reliant on somebody else's, emotional state one day as to whether they're, feeling good and in a good mood, or bad or in a bad mood, or they're struggling financially, and therefore, even if you give a great service, they just can't, give a little bit extra. And anyways, I'm frustrated by the whole thing, but I want
And
to.
Scott, like I say, I agree 1000% with you. I think there needs to be a better system, but this is the unfortunate thing in the salon industry too, is none of our earnings are guaranteed ever. You could have a full day booked with $1,500 on your book, and every single person could no show you. You could, if you live in Canada, we're not allowed to have credit cards on file. And even if we did, and it's a 50% charge or something like that, all of a sudden we're losing 50%. So I feel like it's a problem in so many different areas of the salon industry, is that there really isn't that consistency because we are commission workers for the most part, right? And we are reliant on our clients to pay these types of things or whatever. So again, I personally, like, if we're taking all of these feelings out, I personally, as a service provider, have gotten to the point where I'm almost 15 years into doing my services. I have regular clients. I think that my prices reflect my worth, and I am more than happy with what I earn at the end of the day for the work that I put out. So if I have a client who's asking, oh, I need to throw a tip on here, I say absolutely not. I think tipping should only be if you just love this experience and you want it as a little extra thing, great, but it's never expected and it's never necessary. I'm not relying on that to pay my bills. And I do think that that's how it should be across the board, is that every single service provider is charging what they need to charge. However, not every single service provider. I have 15 years experience backing me up, where I'm confident in my service, and that's why I feel like I can charge such. Somebody brand new out of school is going to have a little bit of a harder time charging $300 for a set of lashes when they don't have the experience to back the service. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, it's such slippery slope, and it's such a tricky thing. And like I say, in our salon, it's definitely something that we have been trying to work out and everything like that, so that our girls, when they do start, I shouldn't just say girls, our people, when they first start out, they are able to make a healthy, reasonable wage working, 32 hours a week kind of thing. So it's, like I said, I agree. This is the funny thing, is like, I'm like, I I am so on three different fences of this, from the service provider side of things to the consumer side of things to the business owner side of things, where I can see every single perspective and I understand the frustrations and the and the push for tips and stuff like that. I can see every single perspective. And like I say, if we could just wave a magic wand and have it where, there's government support for these types of things and there's programs in place and we can just shift the entire thing so that every single person is making what they need to make. Great. The world is so effed right now, right? Like, I'm like, even if you're making a healthy wage, you can still barely afford to get groceries in Canada, at least, kind of thing. So I'm like, I think we just need to press restart on the entire world and just and figure it all out again. Because again, in my perfect world, tipping wouldn't exist either.
Let's all fly to Mars and start a whole new community with new rules. Anyways, listeners, this is a hot topic, and we want to hear from you and continue this debate, hear opinions. Obviously, it's a very, very contentious issue, especially in our industry. So we invite you. First of all, we actually want to do a podcast with not just me and Sarah. We'd like to bring some salon, professionals, owners, stylists, estheticians come on and have like a roundtable discussion where we debate this topic more thoroughly. So if you're interested in participating, hit us up with an email, info@salonsos.ca. We would love to hear from you and potentially invite you onto a future episode to talk about this live. Otherwise, you can just send us your opinion. If you have solutions, you have ideas, either through our email that I just gave or through our social media @salon.s.o.s. And keep an eye out. October 12th, we're going to be doing a special day where we're going to make this a hot topic. So you can look for our post on that day. If you're on that day, we'll have some stories inviting people to sort of share comments, opinions around this. We really want to hear from you. We'd love to do a poll, actually. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, we also have a poll about tipping. So feel free to check that out and respond so we can see how you feel about it. All right, everybody. To tip or not tip, that is the question. Think about it. Tell us what you think, and have a great day in the meantime. Bye for now. Thanks for participating, Sarah. It's great debating with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Salon Scoop podcast. This show is produced by Salon S.O.S, a digital marketing agency by industry professionals for industry professionals. If you want simple and affordable solutions for any of your salon marketing needs, such as websites, client loyalty, Google search rankings, social media, or more, come visit us at salonsos.ca or on Instagram @salon.s.o.s. If you want to hear more episodes like this and help us continue to bring the industry great content, it would mean so much to us if you would support us in one of the following ways. Either share this episode with one other industry professional, and rate the show on Spotify or write us a quick review on Apple Music. We want to hear your feedback. If you have follow-up questions or ideas for future episodes, please reach out. DM us on Instagram @salonus.s.o.s or hit us up on our website again at salonsos.ca. Again, thanks so much for listening. Now go get your hustle on, keep smiling, and we'll catch you on our next episode.